I want to thank everyone for coming to this final panel. As you can understand, it's the toughest panel to be on because it's after lunch. So it's tough for you as well as for us. So this session is called Christians and Middle East Politics. I will be making the first presentation on Christian militarization in Iraq. Professor Angelikis Yaka will present Christian networks in the Middle East, followed by Professor Nikos Christofis, securitizing identity, anti-Christian policies during the AKP rule. So, as you can see, the title of my presentation is regarding Christian militias in Iraq. So, let's introduce the subject a little bit. I'll try to be as quick as possible, given the time. The idea behind this paper presentation was that there wasn't much literature, at least compared to the one on Copts and Maronites and the church-state relationship in general, with regards to the fate of Christians in Iraq. Christians, besides cooptation policies and besides the relationship itself with the state. So because of the various happenings that occurred during the past decades in Iraq, starting with during the 1970s, the Ba'athification Arabization project, which effectively nationalized many places of worship, schools, and so forth. I've differentiated between 4 points in time to keep it simple. The 1970s, 1991 and onwards, 2003 with the US invasion, and 2014 with the advent of ISIS in the region. So why are we looking at Christian militias? Because the focus of the literature in the Middle East is mainly focused on the Sunni-Shia divide, on the Sunni-Shia antagonism, on the Kurdish state-building process. There are many discussions regarding the Coptic identity debate within Egypt, but there is no such clearly defined discussion with regards to Christians in Iraq, at least for the time being, not as much. It seems that because of the cooptation policy between the Chaldean Church and the state during the past decades in Iraq, the issue was not how Christians would be assimilated within the Iraqi identity, but how their religious identity would be respected. That meant two things. The first was that on the one hand, their religious rights would be secured, but on the other hand, with regards to their the extent of their political participation in Iraqi affairs, there would be a sort of plafond. If you want to give a very brief overview of the various church denominations in Iraq, there's the Chaldean Catholic Church, which is about 70% of Christians in Iraq. The Church of the East, about 28–30%, and then the Orthodox one, the Orthodox and Catholic Armenians, the Greek Orthodox, and the Protestants. So, because of, as I said before, the 1970s and the Ba'athification project, because of the Kurdish state building during the 1990s, and because of the US invasion in 2003, there's been a slow but very apparent Christian exodus from Iran, either abroad or internally displaced. which came to a front in 2014 with the arrival of ISIS, which meant that a large majority or most of the Christians that originally lived in Baghdad moved further to the north near the Kurdish regions because there was a historical background there because of the Nineveh plains and Karakosh and Al-Kosh. Just a second. Thank you. So what we're looking at here are the various militarization factors that we can take into account to see why we count at least 4 main Christian militias in Iraq. The first is the church cooptation policy, and the fact that it was used as a survival strategy both for the interests of the church as well as the Christian communities. The fact that they were not included within the identity debate, at least as far as the Christian Iraqi civil society wanted, meant that the tenets of the cooptation policy was not viewed as one that would benefit in the long run the interests of the Christians. And as I said before, there was a plafond with regards to access to political power. On the other hand, during the early 21st century, up until and after 2014, there was the presence of radical jihadi groups, which moved forward with ethnic cleansing. There was a very clear fear of extinction within the various Christian communities, which led to the internal displacement and the exodus abroad. And they needed to figure out a way to basically survive, because what ISIS put forward as options for the Christian communities when it met them was to either convert or pay a special tax or meet their deaths. So in other words, the Christians had 3 options in comparison with these 3 radical options. The first was to do nothing, to stay neutral. The second one was to join some sort of either national or paramilitary force, a larger paramilitary force. And the third one was to move forward and create local paramilitary organizations that would secure their very strict interests locally. At the same time, there was the issue regarding the close relationship with the church, the Chaldean church, and the previous regimes, which meant that Christians were largely seen as collaborating with the previous regime, and there was a very clear case of scapegoating. And even because of the fact that the current regimes were unable to offer adequate protection to the Christians, there was a very clear need to move on, basically. And since Baghdad was seen as an unsafe environment, especially because of the sectarian strife between Sunni and Shia and the antagonism with the Kurdish population, and of course radicalism, they moved to the Kurdish controlled areas near Mosul. Yeah, the facts on the ground, I think I covered that already, so I'll move past that. So why militias? Militias have the advantage of being usually created in order to serve the interests of a specific population. At the same time, because they have a sort of, they're a sort of entity, they can be used in order to move into some sort of debate with the state. Of course, they can be a security apparatus in order to protect the interests of a population. And because of the fact that, I forgot to mention that in the 1970s, because of the Ba'athification project, we had the creation of the ADM, the Assyrian Democratic Movement, which went against the policy of the Chaldean Church and was moving forward with arguments for an Assyrian identity that would be different from the Sunni or Shia one or Kurdish one. Even going forward into discussing the eventual possibility of an Assyrian autonomous state. So it makes sense that most of the militias that were created in the north near Mosul, in Karakosh and Al-Kosh, were basically founded by the already existing political entities for Assyrians. And at the same time, why militias? Because there were already Kurdish, Sunni, and Shia militias present in the wider region. So it makes sense to form an entity that would be able both to protect against radicalism and also to ascertain themselves against other entities that would present themselves as protectors of the entire region. So that's why we have the Nineveh Plains Guards, originally called the Church's Guardians, the Nineveh Plains Protection Units. I'll talk about them later, but also Babylon Brigades and the smaller ones, Dwenk Nasha and the Nineveh Plains Forces. So this is a map of Iraq. Mosul and Al-Kosh and Karakosh are in the north. Kurdistan is on the right. And also some pictures of soldiers, paramilitary soldiers with tattoos of the cross or going to church for your viewing pleasure. So the first militia we're going to talk about, and it's probably one of the first ones, if not the first one, is the Nineveh Plains Guard, the NPG. It moved to the Nineveh. Most Christians moved to the Nineveh Plains. So because of their proximity to the KRG, there was an informal agreement between the KRG and the population and the subsequent militia that they would provide housing for them, because that was not available. The Christian population moved there because there was no other place to go to, but that doesn't mean that they had places to live in, most of them. So the KRG provided housing, provided funding for the Church's Guardians, which originally amounted to about 1,000 soldiers. Eventually, the Church's Guardians became the Nineveh Plains Guardians of Karakosh. They were also called at some point the Christian Peshmerga, was the Kurdish militia, basically, and because it was comprised of Christians, of course, it was called the Christian Peshmerga. And because of their relationship with the KRG, that also meant that they did not promote ties with the Iraqi government or the Iraqi National Guard. So what I want you to keep in mind is that this militia is closely connected with the KRG and does not have a close relationship with the Iraqi state, the Iraqi forces. The second militia that was created is in 2014. Up until then, there's only the NPG. It's the Nineveh Plains Protection Units, NPU. It was created once ISIS arrived in Al-Kosh. And it was basically created from the will of the Assyrian Democratic Movement. And because the Assyrian Democratic Movement always pictured their eventual identity recognition as Assyrians to be contingent from their relationship with Baghdad itself and not Erbil, which was in KRG, they maintained close links. And even this militia, which amounted to a few thousand people, there were very real discussions in order to integrate it in some way with the Iraqi National Guard. From what I gather in recent months or last year, they eventually morphed into the Iraqi National Guard. That's the symbol right there of the Nineveh Plains Protection Units on the arm of the soldier. Other militias, not so big as the other two, are the Babylon Brigades, which was a smaller one, and that's why it's integrated into the militia umbrella of the Popular Mobilization Units, the PMU. Their flag is on the left, the green one, and the flag of the PMU is on the right, it's the yellow one. This is the militia umbrella that is comprised of 60 to 70 militias with Shia fighters, Sunni fighters, Yazidis, and also Christians. And they work closely with the Baghdad government, with the Baghdad National Guard, anyway. On the other hand, we have Dwek Nasha and the Nineveh Plains forces. The first one is also linked with a political party, as well as the second one, but the first one is Dwek Nasha is linked with the Assyrian Patriotic Party, while the NPF is linked with the Bet Nahrain Democratic Party. Both parties, in search for an eventual Assyrian identity, for the recognition of an Assyrian identity, and perhaps some sort of autonomy in the future, consider that they need to maintain links, close links, and a very concrete relationship with the KRG in order to assure the longevity of Assyrians in the future. Anything that happens in the future needs to go through the KRG. That's how they view things. So to sum up, the NPU and the Babylon Brigades are pro-Iraq government, while the NPG, which I'll remind you, is the one that existed ever since 2004, the Church's Guardians, is with the KRG. Dwek Nasha as well, and the Nineveh Plains forces as well. So, what's happening in recent years? Because we talked about 2014, 15, 16. What's happening in the past few years? In late 2019, the Ankawa district in Erbil, which was a mainly Christian district, mainly Christians lived there, was officially upgraded to the status of a district. Barzani himself, the latest Barzani as prime minister, said that it should be considered as a safe haven for Christians. While at the same time, the Chaldean Archbishop Varda of Erbil said that he considers it the most prominent enclave for Christians in the Middle East. What does that? If we need to take a step back and see why the KRG is doing this upgrading and why there is such a close relationship between both, in a way, safeguarding the Christian population, funding various militias, and working closely with them. What does the KRG take from this relationship? The first one is that the fact that the KRG is protecting Christians is a sort of foreign policy for the KRG, because that means that, as we heard in previous panels, the Christian lobbies in America are very powerful. So the fact that a KRG government is seen as protecting Christian population always has a beneficial after effect on American foreign policy with regards to KRG. That also means that the KRG is putting forward an image of religious coexistence within its autonomous region, and contrasting it with the rest of what is happening in Iraq. And with regards to the quote of Archbishop Varda, should we say that there is slowly a cooptation stance that is slowly forming with the clergy? That seems to be a bit soon to say. The pebbles are there for a closer cooptation stance, for a stronger cooptation stance, but because the Chaldean patriarch is still in Baghdad, naturally, and is still closely linked with the Iraqi government, and he's moving in a different direction from the rest of the Christians, which are in Erbil and Karakos. Patriarch Sako is more so promoting an image of unity and not division between the clergy government and the Baghdad government, and saying that the more militias are created, the more that means that the conflict with other radicalized militias or actors, such as the Islamic State, will create a very volatile, an even more volatile situation in Iraq. And the reason behind this is that while everyone is proclaiming abroad that ISIS and radical actors have been defeated in Iraq and Syria, the general assumption within Iraq and Syria is that they've gone into hiding and they're waiting for a better opportunity. So that's why I'm going to wrap up. So in view of a conclusion, basically, we need to ask the question whether with the creation, the formation of militias, Christians are trading freedom and equality for security, because as you saw from the presentation of the main militias, either these militias are local and protecting the very narrow interests of a specific Christian community, or they are integrated into a larger force, such as the KRG one or the PMU. So I think I'm out of time. 23 minutes. So
1 minute.
1 minute. So
Do something.
So what remains to be seen is whether these local militias will retain their specific identity linked to the regions that they're protecting, or whether they will either disappear or morph into something bigger. And the question is, will they morph into something local but bigger, like local militias coming together and creating something more, or will they finally enter into a very clear integration with either Baghdad or the Erbil government?